Hello, this is Derek Fournier with WhatTheBuck.net coming to you with our Redskins preview. Buccaneers face what can be legitimately considered some must-win games here after losing to the Falcons this week in the playoff race. The race to 10 has been called off by Coach Morris, and I don't necessarily think that makes that much sense, but it really doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is we've got to get to a minimum of 10 to have a shot, and hopefully stack up some wins here and then have a play-in game with New Orleans for the last game of the year, which sets up an amazingly exciting year for Bucs fans. Now, when you look at the Redskins, this is a team that's been sort of manic. They've been able to play very well against some very good teams like the Bears, and then play very poorly against other teams. So I went back and watched some of the film on the Redskins, and the team is very different now than they were earlier in the year through a combination of injuries and I think just sort of circumstance with the Albert Haynesworth suspension. Shanahan really trying to change that team from the inside. The change to the 3-4 has been a very difficult one. They don't really have the personnel necessarily to run that. They do at the linebacker with Arapco and Fletcher. Those guys are playing good football, but the front line is struggling. Carricker and Kimoato and those guys are having some serious problems establishing a line. And none of the guys on the team, except for those two linebackers I mentioned, Arapco and Fletcher, are really tackling particularly well, especially with LaRon Landry out of the lineup. Now, he's questionable this week. Carlos Rogers is questionable this week. This is a different defense with those two guys out of the game. Now, we've got Philip Buchanan, ex-Buccaneer, who played incredibly poorly last week. We're hoping that he's in there again this week. Not a strong tackler. He's never been a particularly strong tackler. He got better when he was with us, but he sort of regressed since he left here. And this sets up very well for what the Bucs are doing on offense with the Garrett Blount. The real question is going to be, will Greg Olsen be willing to stick to that relatively vanilla plan, which is, listen, we're going to run the ball with Blount, because if he gets to almost to the second level, if he is right behind that front line, there's very few people that are tackling on this Redskins team. There's not a lot of heart being showed. And I can understand that. It's a tough year for the Redskins. That's not a slight to the organization. I think it's a tough transition time. And it took some real stones to go ahead and suspend Albert Haynesworth, who's better than anyone else on that defensive line, even when he's playing sort of half the game. But right now, if you get LeGarrette Blount's 250, 260 pounds to that second level, it's going to be an ugly, ugly day for the Washington Redskins defense. And once that run gets established, which we've already seen, it sets up play action for Josh Freeman and the rest of the offense. Now for the Bucs, we're concerned because Mike Williams was held out of practice, and he might play this week. Now, we haven't had to see what our receiving core looks like without Mike Williams. Now, you can kind of assume what's going to happen. You'll see Stovall get some more chances. You'll see Strouder in there a lot more. Ben will be featured more, but we don't have another natural X to step into that role. Well, guess what? We may have to. Hopefully, we won't have to, and we'll be able to just run the ball. But Josh Freeman, even in a couple of bad games, has played well, and I think we'll continue to do so. The weather will certainly come into play here. It's going to be cold. Hopefully, we'll be able to get the game going without the precipitation that's going on. But in some ways, with the Redskins having a revolving door at the running back position, I think on the broadcast for the Giants game, they said they've had 12 different halfbacks line up back there. And I know Terrain is starting to get back into shape. But this is a team that really is injured across the board. They do have some skill. We know Donovan McNabb can get the job done if he's able to stay upright. Santana Moss and Chris Cooley are both talented. Alexander's talented as well. But the offensive line for the Redskins has not been playing well. They are relatively slow-footed, and that sets up well for our defense, assuming Coach Morris will let them rush out of their 4-3, as Steve White correctly points out in his passingonthegame.blogspot.com blog. Though with the 3-3-5 configuration and the twist that they tend to implement with that 3-3-5, it may actually set up well for what we do, because the offensive line of the Redskins is not particularly good at adapting. And it's the tackles, right? It's edge rushes, so we should see a decent game by Styles White, as well as by the Bennett Crowder experiment on the left-hand side. McCoy will be blocked in the middle by Robach, and whatever combination of guards they can actually set up. So on the running game, I mentioned LeGarrette Blount. The interesting thing for me with the running game for the Redskins anyway is that they tend to be very weak around the edges. If you can set the edge either with an extra tight end, a crack back on the receiver, or just your lineup, that's how you can get to that second level quickly. That's how Brandon Jacobs did, and Ahmad Bradshaw as well. And if you can get to that second level, as I said earlier, you can certainly get some big yards. LeGarrette Blount, if you look at the way his yardage goes, despite his size, where you'd think he'd make all of his sort of wampum in the middle, he's being a much more productive runner on the outside, averaging over 5 yards a carry to either edge. The only other place he's at 5 yards a carry is at the left A gap. So with our patchwork offensive line, which we'll go into this week with Zuda at center, Larson at left guard, and it looks like Hardman at right guard. There's still some debate about whether it'll be Lee or Trueblood at the right tackle position. I still think that I'll take this offensive line with the way they're playing, very blue collar, against this Redskins front seven, and a team that's really playing for nothing other than pride. If you look at the press in Washington, even they're starting to question whether the Redskins are going to be able to put together another win. Statistically, The Redskins put up some yards, but other than that, they're not particularly good. But the differences from one to the other at this point of the year are very subtle. If you look at the difference between 32nd place in defensive yards per game at 347 yards, we're at 15th with 334 yards. It's a very modest differential. So the keys to the game for us, again, at this point of the year, they start getting very static. It's about establishing the run, getting to that 140, 150 yard mark with 20-plus carries for LeGarrette Blount. Certainly you can spread that out. I know that the team has put out a lot of information that they're going to be using Ernest Graham in short yardage conditions instead of using LeGarrette Blount. I don't really care who they use, but if you're going to be an NFL team that's going to be making a playoff push, you've got to be able to get 3rd and 1 and 3rd and 2 pretty consistently without going into a spread formation and trying to trick the defense. We've got to protect the football. Josh has been a little bit off target lately. He's going to have to rediscover his accuracy. If he's going to throw those out routes, he's got to make sure he's throwing it to the outside, not the inside, which is what made him susceptible to Grimes last week. But Kellen Winslow's been sort of the missing man, and I think that he should be someone that can take advantage of this defense as well over the middle. And last but not least, we got to harass McNabb. We had a regression on the defensive line last week. We didn't get a lot of pressure against Matt Ryan. We got some in his face, but we didn't get any sacks. I think that we got to get that defense back fired up. And with the lack of fear, really, of a top-tier back, we got to get back to the quarterback and force McNabb to make mistakes because he's certainly capable of doing so. That's the wrap-up. I do think that we're going to take this game. I think that the Redskins, and again, this isn't a slight to them or to their fans, it's a tough year that they're going through. They've got a lot of things going on. I didn't see a lot of heart against the Giants. Now they may rediscover that. They've been a bounce-back team this year after going and getting drummed out one week. They've been coming back strong. I just don't know if there's anything left in the tank. I see a Buccaneers win this week. I think it's going to be something like 31 to 34 to 17. High scoring because I think there's going to be some scores at the end. But anyway, that's the review. Let me know what you think about it, and we'll be back for a Redskins review, hopefully after a victory, us getting to our 8th win and keeping the hope of the playoffs alive in a very competitive NFC with the exception of the NFC West.